What's going on, everyone? It's Mitch from RespectMyRegion.com back with another episode of the North American Weed Tour podcast, looking at the best in legal cannabis across the map. Today, I'm joined by a special guest, Bryan Surface, out of Colorado with a couple different companies, vertically integrated operation with West Cannabis, the dispensary, Outlaw Cannabis, the flower brand, and George Hashington, the critically acclaimed Rosin brand. How you doing today, Bryan?
I'm doing great. Great to be here, Mitch. Super pumped to be on your show.
Hell yeah. Well, I start every episode off with the same question for all my guests around their personal origin story around cannabis, whether that's personal, professional, a little bit of both, whatever you choose to be vulnerable sharing. So I'm just curious, Bryan, kind of when did you and cannabis start your relationship?
Well, I mean, cannabis and I started the relationship as far as me as a consumer, probably into my high school days, early college, which I know is probably later than some. Um, but I'm fairly old, for this space. I'm 44 years old. But as far as working in the business, it was early 2016. Actually, I take that back. More like mid 2015. I moved to Colorado. I owned a software company, so I don't want to be judged on this, but I came kind of from the corporate space. Worked at Deloitte Consulting, some big software companies. Gradually got smaller and started my own software company. Sold it in the summer of 2015. Was living in Colorado, the Boulder area, and this whole new industry was being created right before my eyes in a product that I've consumed for a long time. I guess 25 years, and I had to be a part of it. And that transition was pretty interesting for someone, I guess, with my background and coming from the Midwest. Missouri is where I was born. Kansas, I went to school at KU, and lived in the Kansas City area for a while. And so in the Midwest, a lot of people smoked weed, sure, but it didn't have the kind of culture that it has in Colorado. I mean, the Kansas is a lot different than Colorado. Moving out here in the summer of 2014, after about 6 months of legalization, and just seeing the culture around cannabis, and a lot centers around music, the shows that Colorado gets, the music, the people that come and play in Colorado, I think breeds a strong, not just cannabis culture, but I would say also psychedelics and some other things that are starting to gain acceptance and get hot. But when I sold the software company in 2015, I had to be a part of the space. And this is where I'll be a little careful on what I can share. But I did get into this space off of my corporate world in a fairly typical cannabis fashion. Starting with wanting to cultivate and grow and finding people who knew what they were doing in that space. And a lot of those people weren't doing it quite licensed yet in 2014, 2015, and kind of cut my teeth on some interesting projects that then kind of turned into using some of my own money and raising money to buy a cultivation and a store that we got off the ground in late 2016 with West. And the formation of Outlaw, though we didn't brand Outlaw for a long time, as our assets we had to spend and reinvest. We've reinvested millions of dollars into our grow and our store to bring them up to par in the brand and the experience that we want to provide consumers.
Yeah, and with that, starting with the retail, well, obviously, like Colorado, from my understanding, I've been there a little bit, but I'm not from there. Is a more vertically integrated market, right? Like it's a lot more common. When you guys first started with the cultivation and the store, was it really just about building up the supply for your own retail outlet, or what did you have the foresight of being like, okay, we're going to build it for the retail and then tackle wholesale, or kind of what did that thought process look like?
No, I think that, Mitch, that's a great question. I mean, you're taught in business school, that focus is everything. And to think that you're going to jump into this new space and go down and be a retailer and be a cultivator and a manufacturer and an indoor farmer. I think in many industries, they would use the school of thought and the training that they teach you in school that's not the right strategy. you're right that in Colorado, that was really part of the norm, in a way that people could survive and make money in such a competitive space. The passion really started with the desire to cultivate, to create what we wanted to be world-class raw material. And the store, not that it wasn't a secondary thought. I mean, the store ended up being the mechanism that really helped us cash flow in the early years of getting the cultivation up and running, of hiring different team members early on. And we've our head grower, who's a big part of our executive team, Seth, has been with us over 4 years now. But before we had Seth, the first couple of years of using and testing different growers, and all the growers that I've ever hired that have been tasked with orchestrating and kind of being in charge of our cultivation have been legacy market growers. And we found a team of really passionate legacy market growers that had the desire to take their skills, recreationally, that we landed on in late, I guess it was maybe early 2018, and really getting the team right in the grow really was the precipice of our business taking off. I mean, the store needed time to develop customers, but it also needed time for us to get great products in there and get to be known for our flower. And the store is a huge part of our strategy, and it's a lot of the way that we make a good part of our revenue now. But it's always the grow is what we've sunk a lot of money into and reinvestment into, and we care a lot about the products that we create. Absolutely. Hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. And that's, obviously cultivation, right? Like the plant is what it all starts with, right? Whether you're selling at retail or manufacturing into rosin, edibles, whatever, the plant is the backbone of why we're all here. And I heard from our previous conversations, and even today, you were like, don't judge me. I come a little bit more from the corporate world, but
Yeah.
I think you also, I think, much respect to yourself. Obviously, you've been in the space, long enough. You're not a new person that just hopped in, right? But I think in talking to you and learning a little bit about your team, you definitely prioritize, legacy, right? Like some people, there's this conversation of the battle between legacy and suits that sometimes gets overly talked about in the echo chamber that the industry,
Right.
but I just feel like you kind of organically seek to work with that crowd. I'm just kind of curious, what's your perspective and the importance on honoring, highlighting, and working with people that come from the legacy side of cannabis?
In Colorado, I think it's almost everything. In Colorado, and I'm being specific about Colorado because I don't know if every state you would say the same thing about, but Colorado respects the people that talk about marijuana, that judge it, the consumers that care about it the most here, I think care about how the company that's creating that product that they're talking about came to be, and specifically who's heading the ship, who's creating the flower. And I think that's what gets their buy-in. The consumers that we're trying to reach and that we care about, that talk about, Snacksland and Green Dot and 710 Labs and Laser Cat and all of these great brands out there. We want them talking about Outlaw Cannabis, George Hashington in the same breath. And I think those people care about the people that founded those companies and that are growing, and what those companies care about. And so, so it's not just about our consumers and what they care about in our target market. That is a big part of it, but it's also about the ability to create great products. And I think that there's a lot of talent. There's a lot of talent that you can find, even though it's an interesting way to find it, given how this industry and given what marijuana was for a long time. But there's a lot of talent out there that care a lot about the plant, and that you can provide opportunities and even ownership and partnership opportunities in the rec market to bring that skill to the rec market. Absolutely. It's a big part of the strategy. It's something I care about a lot.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's beneficial for the business, but it's also like a great thing to do as we transition in from what was to what is, and continue to transition into what will it be.
It's the true social equity, if you want to know. Like, you hear them, they talk about social equity a lot. What is social equity? I mean, the states want to put together these programs to benefit people who have maybe been hurt by the war on marijuana, and that person can in some states can be anyone, but really, and then I think that's great that states try to do that. Although, I mean, who are we trying to help here? We're trying to help people who may have been hurt, but what about people that have given their lives for years, that have cared about this plant, that saw a long time ago that this was something that can help people, that states were overly aggressive on regulating for a lot of reasons that don't deal with necessarily harm to the consumer? How do we integrate those people and provide them, true opportunity, like real ownership, not just I'm working for a cannabis company,
Mhm.
but I'm a part owner in this brand, that really is shaping my life.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's impactful, and I think that's the thing, is putting people in those positions. Ownership is huge, right? It's a lot more than what a lot of folks are doing in this space. Being vertically integrated, there's obviously some benefits to that, right? Like you can control your supply chain a little bit more. You have your own retail outlet, so you obviously can maximize, own the whole margin when you sell it through there. But there also are some challenges, and you have taken a unique approach, which I enjoy, and would be the take if I were in your shoes, would and segment each of these different each of these different operations into their own brand, so they can live on an established brand in their own regard. What are some of the challenges in going from like, hey, I'm starting a business, to quickly being like, okay, now I have three completely separate business models and brands that I need to maintain?
And that's another great question. I appreciate the opportunity to kind of share the story. I mean, really, I don't know if I would have done it off the bat. I think it took me 5 years of kind of fighting in in the trenches, digging in the trenches, um, getting a taste for how the industry operates, the people in it, who to align yourself with, who to be careful of. Um, they say the biggest decision a business owner can make, especially if they're in multi-unit retail, is going from one location to two. And there have been plenty of opportunities where we've considered buying another store, doing a few other things. I think a lot of times it didn't work out. And as I look back, I'm pretty happy, because I don't know if we were quite ready. And as you know, the industry has like pretty volatile swings. And so it's hard in the good times. You want to make moves. Those good times can quickly change into harder times, depending on, given the microeconomics and the macroeconomics of this industry. And so I think you have to really be ready if you're going to expand and buy other licenses. I mean, buying other licenses and building other brands, it's a whole host of things. It's negotiating a contract and an asset purchase agreement to buy that license. Usually, if you're not going to buy the land, you're negotiating a lease. You're putting together an operating agreement amongst, sometimes different investors. And it's all of it takes time, and it has its own risk. And so, and then, once you go through all those hoops, then comes the fun part of really launching. And in Colorado, no matter who you are, even if you've had success in the past, I think launching into this space in a new brand has its own challenges, whether people will accept it or not. It helps if you've done something big before. And if people know you, the folks from 710 and Green Dot, they get a lot of love. They've done a great job. I know them well. They can spin up and do different things given their success. But someone like myself, who is still building our notoriety and our brand, it's a big risk, a big financial risk, a big business risk to scale. And I would say I only think I have a chance of succeeding, given the 5 and 6 years of experience and the team that we've built in that time.
Yeah, I mean, Colorado, I always give people, a hard time from that state, because you guys beat it. I'm from Washington. You guys beat us by mere months to having recreational cannabis for sale. So you guys get to claim you were the first state, and we're always like, our claim to fame is we were right behind Colorado. But in being that, and also living in a state like that, at this point now, from 2015, 2016 to now, right? Like we're in a completely new market. It is super mature. It is hyper competitive, right? We've already seen a couple oversupplies to potentially, the pendulum swinging from a buyer's to a seller's market on the wholesale market. Some of these other new states are like haven't even haven't even seen the pendulum swing yet, and we've seen it
Yeah.
swing a couple different times. What's kind of the current state of the market, and how does being vertically integrated kind of better prepare you to deal with some of those swings, either way?
I mean, the current state of the market in Colorado, it's pretty tough. I mean, there's a lot of people that are really struggling, a lot of owners, a lot of brands that are going out of business, a lot of brands that are reorganizing, you know, brands that used to have purchasing managers who have owners now doing that work, calling and buying and delivering, owners really stepping up their participation in their companies given the changes that they've had to make. Um, I mean, it's still a thriving market. It's still going to be probably close to a $2 billion market. So there's still a ton of opportunity. But I mean, vertical integration, I think in the market that has the swings that Colorado and the competition that Colorado does allows you to sometimes play, the different assets off each other, the assets that can help you survive. I mean, right now, retail is down. There's been a ton of price compression in the retail business, but that's a lot because wholesale prices, have fallen off a cliff, for raw material. And so a lot of the folks, that have both the grow and the retail, I mean, some of those folks have shut their grows down. Products so cheap they can buy wholesale, and they've kept their retail going to make money and to make ends meet. But there's a lot of cultivation coming off the market. A lot of the largest outdoor growers, because of the market and its current state, didn't plant this year. I don't think Los Sueños planted this year. And so we could see an interesting Croptober, but you want to talk about just the weird economics of cannabis and why there are such drastic swings. The state by state regulation is a big part of that. But even in a state like Colorado, that's mature, that has a ton of competitors and that's down right now, there are microeconomic events within the state that can really change that trajectory. People not planting, cultivation shutting down, but then things like the ballot initiative in Colorado State, where they're going to, there's a big part of the state, Colorado, I think Colorado Springs, down in the Springs, they never legalized recreational marijuana. There are over 100 medical stores. Mm-hmm. And there's a ballot initiative in November for the Springs to allow recreational usage. And the way they've structured it is such that these medical stores can go rec almost immediately. And so you have 100 new rec stores to hit the market. And even though you might not be serving more customers, it might be the same volume with regards to customers and consumers. 100 new stores that need rec products on their shelf will change the wholesale market. And which could change the market in cannabis pretty significantly. So it's super interesting. I would say being vertically integrated though has definitely helped us survive in some of these swings for sure.
Yeah, that cause and effect, right? Like I've seen it in a couple markets where like everyone's commanding top dollar for their flower, whether it's going to raw or straight into jar, on the shelf. Yeah. And so then everyone has the unique idea of let's expand our cultivation footprint. And then you'll see the next year, everybody expanded canopy, and then it's an oversupply, right? And then it only really takes one or two large operators who's like, I'm just trying to liquidate for whatever I can to flood the market, with raw materials that are below a sustainable, price point for anyone that's not trying to liquidate to sell. And that forces everyone, and then you see people tighten up, and then you go into the next year and everyone's kind of puckered up going into that year. So they go a little more conservative and demand rises up again. And we kind of see these swings. And so how much for you guys have you seen, kind of over these 6-7 years at this point, cultivation, people really expand canopy and then see the adverse effects of that within a year or two? Is that something you guys are seeing as well?
Oh yeah. And hopefully I'm coming through.
Yeah.
We're still good. Oh, awesome. Okay, great. Sorry. No, I feel like they're 18 to 24 month swings. And, you had in 2014 and leading up to January 1st, 2014, when the recreational market launched in Colorado, people were moving as fast as they can. The people that were in the know, that had access to get the licenses, to get set up and running. And there was boom times probably until 2017. And then in 2017, late 16, the market tanked pretty hard for a couple of years, where pounds got down into the $700, $800, $900 range. Up until about late 2018, the early part of 2019, where a boom market started again and was accelerated really by COVID. Call it 2019 until about May 2021. And I when I look at the data from our store and our operation, I really talk about May 2021 marking the start of what I think has been a consistent downturn in sales just generally for the state. And I don't know, my anticipation is it might last, I guess you go back to May and it's August, what is that, 15, 16 months? We might have another 6 to 8 months of this cycle. But there are signs that I feel like the market's going to come back, and not just the ballot initiative and not just the shutting down of grows, pardon me. But also, I think some of the inflation and some of the pressures on consumers are going to ease at some point. And I do think the market will come back. I think raw material will sell for a higher price point. I think people will continue to buy, and I think brands in our market will continue to grow, the ones that are strong. And using this time as an opportunity, we've used it as an opportunity to, even though it's been hard, but if you can get the resources, there are a lot of great deals on the market right now for people that are getting out of the business. And so you try and use these down markets, it's a challenge, but you try and use them also if you believe in the space as a time to grow as well. Did I answer your question, Mitch, on that?
Absolutely. And I did a lot. I've worked a fair amount in the real estate sector. I'm not a real estate guy, but what you said right there is very true to even in real estate. And the down market is when, that's when wealth is created or business is pushed forward, if you're positioned properly, right? Like not
Right.
everyone is. And so back on the topic of just vertical integration, right? Like having brands and then also having your own store. Running the retail gives you obviously access to data, whether it's through your POS system, but it also gives you personal interaction with consumers every day. How do you take that and use that, whether it's gut instinct, one-to-one data collection, or looking at the broader data and POS systems? How do you use that to empower kind of the decisions in Outlaw and George Hashington?
Oh man, gosh. That's a great question. I mean, we use the consumer feedback and what we hear in the store. I mean, I think it infiltrates almost every decision we make. This and the store is a lot. I mean, it's being a predictor of the market swings. Having that data allows us to be the predictor. Having the data and providing our store data to folks like, BDS Analytics and Headset, allows us to get really good data, on a broader term from the state. But I mean, genetics, what's hot, and a lot of times when you're talking about how we look at the space, the folks that we talk to, the things that guide some of my decision making on top of our consumers. I mean, we're really educated. A lot of our job is to lead our consumers, to show our consumers something new, to be in the game in a way that allows us to be a trendsetter, or at least know the trends, to be close to being that trendsetter, or right on point. And so there's a lot of things that I try to lead, and then see how our consumers react, and then see how it gets spoken about on Reddit, on Instagram, through our followings there, that then we adapt and make changes in our operation, based on what those folks are saying, and getting that feedback and working on that marketing effort to really, systematize and put into place a way to make systematic decisions based on data is something that I think every cannabis business, somewhat struggles with, given all the disparate, information and ways to market that's really unique to cannabis. But it is the only way to run a business. I mean, it's talked about in MBA programs, being a data-driven run business is probably kind of a cliche business term, but how are you to like guide and set trends or even know what to do if you're not listening to what customers are saying and what this community that I talk about on Reddit and that we try to reach through our brands like George Hashington, what they're saying, what they value. So it's everything. The way that we get, our store information, our Google reviews, our bud tenders, who we call cannabis specialists, who have that direct one-on-one interaction with customers, and who have, their own tactics and their own products that they want to push that we talk about as a team. But getting feedback and asking those customers questions when they come in to rebuy. I mean, targeting our customers in our loyalty program that we see buying a certain product set, giving them money off to get their feedback, is something that we do in a sniper-like fashion. So.
Yeah, and that's the leg up, right? Because everyone talks about, the bud tender is the last line of defense, for a brand, but being able to get that insight from that level. Most, brands in some states that whether you're not, or if you're not vertically integrated, or you're not in states that don't allow that, there's that disconnect. The most you can do is a vendor day, right? And try and interact with consumers. And it's imperative to understand, like we used to sell t-shirts, and if you looked at sometimes just the data on, man, we didn't sell many of these units, that's a bust. But then when you actually get out in the field and get out in stores and you hear 30 or 40 different people be like, I love this design, but if it was this cut or this color, and it's not like, oh, that was a complete miss. We just didn't get it. We didn't package it the right way, right? Or present it the right way. And that's a lapse that you wouldn't get on a spreadsheet that you would get like, oh, 40 people said that. Then yeah, it's not just one person's opinion. And, with you were mentioning Reddit, obviously you guys, have been buzzing, and we were talking about it a little bit beforehand, the George Hashington brand's really, really buzzing on Reddit, and building that, that name. Obviously Hash Rosin has exploded, over the last year or so. I think Colorado's done a great job at extracts, and obviously is a solventless extraction, for hash, but Colorado's really been the leader in that, from my opinion, in terms of the equipment, the equipment manufacturers and companies. A lot of them are based in Colorado. Again, you guys were first to the market with this. When did you feel like hash first started taking off in Colorado? Like, I guess, when did it start picking up steam? And then when would you say it started taking off? Because I know those are two, it's been around for a while, but it started to bump up. And I feel like it's really started to kind of ramp up this last, 2022, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, no, great. I mean, the rosin game and creating rosin and consuming rosin is all of it's a world that I love living in, but rosin is how I consume daily. Extracts in general for the last 7 years, even butane and lab process extract, live resin, I've loved. I've gone through all my different phases, wax shatter, live resin, rosin. I still love to dab lab extracted live resin from our flower, especially. All props to 710 Labs, who's big in California now, but they started in Colorado, and 710 has always been probably the king of rosin, which has really helped them in their flower game. But they started with rosin, and I want to circle back to how rosin and flower coincide and how they can help each other. But I think 710 has been here from the beginning. Green Dot, I think also, and Laser Cat, those three brands. Green Dot's been big on the rosin scene for the last 2 or 3 years. But in the last 2 years in Colorado, there have been a number of rosin brands, really take off. Soy Cabano is a well-respected rosin brand. A Single Source here in Colorado is crushing it. Oleo has been around in the lab processing hash game for a long time. Their rosin is respected. Dab Logic, who's been around for a while, but the last 2 years, I think some of it has to do with the market downturn and a lot of really quality material sitting on the market, and people, instead of like not wanting to sell $700-800 pounds with that really great raw material. And so what else do you do with that really great raw material to maybe maximize? I think there's a love of rosin and hash for sure that's driven the desire to consume. But I also think there's business and financial aspects that have kind of exploded in the rosin world. And a lot of it has to do with the decreasing price of raw material on the wholesale side. I think that has definitely that, and that's my own gut feeling and my own intuition for just disclaimer purposes for why I think the hash game has exploded. I mean, it still is, even though there's been price compression in that category, it still is the most expensive products that you're going to find on shelves. And I think if you when you see the price of raw material and wholesale prices increase, you know, you might see a few of these players who are doing runs and who've tried to start a brand, you might see them filter out when they can make more money off that raw material by not processing it and lengthening the process of when they're selling it and making money on it. But, you know, for us, like being a smaller player and maybe not one of the originals out of the gate, you know, or even medical in the aughts, the 06, 08, you know, and then the medical game here in Colorado boomed, and then recreational happened, and we weren't a part of that. And so to maybe get respect for our flower, I always really loved the rosin and the solventless play, just to show the world how good our flower is. And even though we've separated it into a different brand, over time, you know, people will find out how George Hashington has powered the Trop cookies, the banana punch, this incredible, you know, lemon frazzle drip that we have here that I think can compete with any of the lemons from the big boys on the market. You know, they'll know who produced the flower and the raw material that went into that, which can bring hype to your flower brand as well. I mean, Green Dot and 710, I think, have really played that card, you know, extremely well, creating great hash and then parlaying that into great flower sales and showing off their flower.
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm not a dabber. I always tell, you know, I'm a big flower guy, but I'm a baby dabber in the comfort of my own home. When I'm by myself, I'll take a little baby dab. That's about the only time. But
Right.
rosin was really got me into concentrates in any regard, just because, you know, again, I love flower. I love the flavor, the aroma of flower. And when you smell some, you know, some good rosin, it is nothing, you know, it smells like just some of the aromas that you get from the flower, just like a pure version of that. And I
Yeah.
like, you'll show me some rosin sometime and I'll be like, all right, I'm not going to do it now, but I have got to taste this stuff, man.
Yeah.
And so for you, like in those two working together, like obviously, like to have a quality rosin, you have to have a quality input. But how much do you feel like on that tandem of those two working together is kind of showcasing the quality and or, you know, again, the aroma and the flavor? If you have good flavored hash, then it's probably good flavored cannabis. What's kind of your take on how those two build off one another?
I mean, you know, growing quality cannabis is everything to making good hash. It's everything to yielding well. I mean, it's everything with regards to making money, and in this business to have good yields. But they really do go hand in hand. You know, I love smoking flower. It's how I consumed for, you know, out of the 25 years that I've been consuming, it's probably how I consumed, you know, solely for 18, 19 of those years. And I didn't know near as much about flower as I know now. And so but I think what rosin and hash did for me is it allowed me, like you talk about the true essence of the plant, you can get that. Obviously the flower represents that in its very initial form, but depending on how you consume that flower, you might not quite get the same essence, the smell is strong of a smell, or even the terp, given how you consume it. If you burn it, you know, the combustion of the fire, while it's great and I like smoke, sometimes inhaling that smoke, you can still get that terp for sure and great flower. But the combustion of it does change a little bit of the experience. Whereas dabbing, you know, in a rig like this with, you know, some incredible, let's see here, this banana punch, I want to show it, you know, something like that. I don't know how well you can see it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, right there.
I mean,
Yeah.
this does give this banana, the banana punch I mean, it smells like banana Laffy Taffy. And the flower smells the same way, but I do feel like when I burn the flower, I get that a sweet and a gas. But when I dab this, I mean, it comes through exponentially
Hmm.
with regards to how I experience it. I realize the high is definitely, it's an extract, so it's stronger. But you know, that for heavy consumers like myself, I think you do build a little bit of a tolerance, even a strain tolerance for that matter.
Hmm.
Um, but man, it's the ritual, you know, that I've set myself in that I just love for sure.
Yeah, one of my last podcasts, I was one of their scientists, and they were talking about the differences of smoking and why, even, because I was like, it's yeah, I can sit down and smoke a quarter, a half ounce of flower and still, be functional,
Right.
right? Fine. But you give me one just medium sized dab and I'm going to go in the corner and be awkward. And they were talking about the science behind how I don't know, your body, some stuff I don't quite understand, but we different consumption methods are the THC is delivered into your system differently. So you build tolerance, like you're saying, you can build a tolerance to a specific strain, but you can also build a tolerance to a specific consumption method, which is
Absolutely.
super unique. Before I get you up out of here, I'm curious, what else does High West, George Hashington, Outlaw Cannabis, what do you guys have planned for the rest of 2022 and kind of beyond that you wish to share with the audience?
Yeah. So, you know, and I'll share it with a disclaimer that, you know, these are forward looking statements. I'll sound like maybe an SEC document. um, you know, we are looking to expand really in all fronts. And I know I don't want to seem naive in saying something maybe as far out there as that, because it's hard to expand on all fronts. But, you know, we are looking to expand in the retail realm. And you know, a question to kind of dovetail into a question you asked me earlier, it is that the trickiness in being vertically integrated is how do you do all the things that you want to do and not step on even your own customers' toes, which I think when you think about expanding in the retail realm and being a wholesaler, that is something that you have to take into consideration. And so geographically desired locations in this market, I mean, there's a lot of opportunity in stores that are currently for sale. And that's a unique circumstance that I don't think will be here forever. And so we have some ability to choose and to look at geographical areas and how we expand retail. We're also, and this is probably 2 to 3 years out, maybe not quite that far out, looking to consolidate our cultivation facilities potentially in another location than where they currently exist. And which is interesting, coming off of probably an expansion where we spent $1.5 million on, which was a big project for us to expand and upgrade our cultivation facility. And given the price of where flower is right now, a lot of people would think that might be crazy. But to really set yourself in long term, you know, you have to look at all of the assets that you operate, you know, the relationships that allow you to operate. And I think constantly be evaluating, is there a better way to do things, even if it costs and takes resources? If you believe in the space, if you're convicted that this is what you want to do and you love it, you know, the market swings are what they are. You know, you continue to try to get resources and you continue to try to make the best business moves. And I think consolidating and expanding on what we've learned in our cultivation and maybe even moving it into a larger facility that might not be right smack dab in the city as we get more distributed is something that we're heavily considering as well.
Moves on the way on all fronts, man. Bryan, I appreciate you hopping on here, sharing some of your journey, breaking down what you're seeing in the Colorado market. For people out there want more information, High West, is it highwest.co or highwestcannabis.co?
It's highwest.co.
.co.
Yeah.
And then I believe on Instagram at highwest.co, at outlawcannabis.co, and then at George_Hashington, right? I'm not even
That
looking
is
at notes.
perfect. You nailed it. You nailed it,
Look at
Mitch.
that. Look at that. I'm impressing myself, man. I didn't smoke weed today. That's why I remembered all that off the rip. So
I'm getting ready to.
Yeah. I got a couple more of these to do today. Otherwise, I'd be burning already. But I got to keep my head somewhat together, man.
Mitch, I want to
So
say I love what you guys are doing at Respect My Region. I followed Joey before I followed you. I followed you for a while now. I've seen some of your interviews. Love, shout out to Anna Cozy out in Sacramento. I think she was one of the first that I saw recently.
mhm.
And you guys, combining this love of music and cannabis, but also featuring the cannabis brands in the different states and given your style and your knowledge, I super wanted to be a part of this. And I super appreciate you having me on and letting us share our story and let me talk.
Hell yeah. No, honored to have you on here, man. Really appreciate it. There's a lot of good insights and good game on here. I'm looking forward to come checking y'all out in person next time I make it to Colorado. Yeah, man. Thank you.
Can't wait. All right. Thank you.
Awesome. This is the North American Weed Tour podcast. I think we have 2 more episodes today. I think 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. So if you guys want to tune in live, check out then. But then, if you're listening to this later on Spotify or Apple, we're updating new episodes every single week. And we got a couple other shows. Stay tuned at respectmyregion.com. Follow us on social media platforms. We'll be back with more later.